This is day 2 of the November 87 7-day retreat. One thing that was not mentioned yesterday at the beginning of the talk is that during the talk it is perfectly all right to change one's posture. Can it be done quietly? Also, I didn't mention that a lot of the topics that come up for talks are taken directly from questions or things that emerge in a discussion in a meeting room, or sometimes a combination of similar questions made into a new question. When a question is used, it is of course anonymous. I hope nobody minds if a concern that they have raised is used for all of us looking at it together. It is only used if it does not reveal the identity of the person, of course. We have found over the years that most questions that move us and concern us are of a very general nature. And that in itself often brings some sort of relief to someone who thinks he or she is the only one who has this problem. One can drop that idea. Our problems are not ours, they're human problems. Some of them created long before we were born, and transmitted from generation to generation through our ways of bringing up children, our ways of relating to each other, which are culturally, socially conditioned, historically conditioned. And we ourselves pass it on to our children or the people we relate to, and most of the time unawares of this very process. And that's why it continues, perpetuates itself. Very often a very destructive process, destructive of the openness and creativeness of direct relationship. Which can only happen if we're not automatically, habitually, mechanically responding to patterns or to images we have of each other and of ourselves. And this is why this work is such a vital work, to see if we can become aware of our conditioned patterns of behaving, thinking, acting, speaking, moving. Become aware of it. That's the very first step. And let change flow from that. Not from the doer, the me that wants to be in a certain way which is conditioned. Conditioned models, conditioned standards, and conditioned ideals according to which we would like to conform, to be. course, the big question is, how does this awareness come into being? An awareness that cuts through conditioning, sheds light on conditioned responses. We're not talking here about the knowledge about it, reading about it. There's been a lot of work, psychology, about conditioned responses. We can be intellectually very knowledgeable about the process, know all about it, and never have observed it, caught it, right at the instant of happening in ourselves, each other. And yet we're not dismissing the intellectual understanding, because particularly in the frame of questioning, of wondering, how do we behave, how do we think and talk, if we've discussed it, looked at it, understood it intellectually, maybe it will spring into awareness when it's actually happening. The intellectual understanding may not be unconnected to the actual insight. How does awareness come into being? An awareness which brings with it the insight into the connectedness, interrelatedness of everything in human beings and in nature, and the interconnectedness, the non-separation, the wholeness of life. In which war, as we lead it now, as we are engaged in right now, personal inner war with the person we're related to, children, parents, husbands, wives, or friends, all the tribal or national wars, have no place in this state of being in which the interconnectedness, interrelatedness of everything is seen and understood in one's guts, in one's whole bloodstream, in one's whole being. How can one get that, get to it, have it happen? This question is ancient. To find a state which is not our divided daily state, divided and conflict-ridden, cumbersome, burdensome, energy-draining daily way of living. Human beings have asked us since time immemorial whether there is a state which is beyond this or free from it, transcending all of our daily miseries and agonies and fears, anger and violence. Much has been said and written about such a state. Many names have been given to it, and many methods advocated to get to it. Paths, spiritual paths, spiritual practices, spiritual training, spiritual behavior, prescriptions for living, relating, prescriptions for renouncing things, renouncing relationships. And yet, if one looks or one has been through this kind of thing, one may have found or may see that one so easily becomes entangled in a new system which is divisive, separate and separating. And it is something one attaches to for fear of not having that, for fear of being stuck in this life that one wants to transcend. Now one clings to the way, to the spiritual path and the methods and the teachers and all the accoutrements, ceremonies, rituals, beliefs, vows. A new system of unfreedom, of boundness, attachment, beholdenness. People keep asking this question: what really should I do on the mat when I sit down? Assuming a person will say that this is a place for spiritual work, what should I do? Or, I'm always wondering, am I doing the right thing? I'm doing that, or I'm doing this. And then the doubts, am I doing the right thing? The right thing for what? One is still caught in this whole framework of thinking, believing that being here now, there is a way and a method to get there, to that promised state of being, in which I believe. And I believe that if I reach that, then my problems, my daily problems and conflicts and burdens will be resolved. Can one see right now that this in itself is assumption, is thought and concept, idea? That there is a state, a way of being in the future to be reached by a certain path, which includes certain methods of practicing, of living, and so forth. In talking like this, questions may come up as you listen. You may question what is being said. You may wish to discuss this. You may have objections to what is being said. We don't have a format here where we have discussion. But we have meetings. We try to have as many as possible. So please bring this to a meeting. I may not remember exactly what I said, and you may not remember it exactly either, but we can start from the beginning and go through it and look at it together and listen to the objections. Listen to what everyone has to say and has experienced and feels and believes, and we'll look at it. with infinite patience. It's not even patience, it's not the right word. I think it's a great joy in exploring things together, two human beings getting together to explore our assumptions, our beliefs, and to start from scratch with no feeling of this is right or wrong, or if that feeling is there, explore it, question it. Where does it come from? Who gave it to one? Or how did one acquire it? So coming back to the question, what is one to do on this mat? All these mats laid out in this room. The cushions on them, they already imply something to be done on them. And one brings previous experiences, previous ideas, previous practices to this mat. So can one, from the moment one sits down, we're arbitrarily starting at this point. Arbitrarily, because wondering about what we're doing, what motivates us, what goals we have, and what methods we believe in, that isn't restricted to sitting down on this mat. But arbitrarily we start here right now. We'll come back later to whether there's any limitation of what we call this work to this mat. If there is, then what meaning does it have if it were restricted just to this space here and this time? So in sitting down on a cushion or on a chair, whatever, is the least tensing, the most natural feeling and relaxed feeling. What is one to do? Who's going to tell one? Or who has told one? Whom is one asking? There are methods and practices that can calm the turbulent, agitated mind. And one of the most frequently used ones in spiritual training, what is called spiritual training, is to somehow or other concentrate on the breathing. Counting the breathing, both exhalation, inhalation, or just the exhalation, counting from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, or counting from 1 to 100,000. I once read in a Tibetan book on Tibetan practice, that the reason that the attention is riveted to the breath in what is called the first stages of spiritual practice is that it has been observed that with every change of breath, thoughts change. In other words, that there is a linkage between the changing pattern of thoughts and the breathing. Personally, I've never observed that. I have never made even really a point of observing it, but it was interesting to me at the time when I read this. This is when I was engaged in Zen practice. And we feel good when we get a reason for doing something, even though we don't explore that reason. We haven't verified it for ourselves, but it gives more weight and importance to what we're doing. So to be aware of the breathing, and that is quite easily verified, may unhook or detach the thinking process. Concentrating on the breathing, there may be moments of time when the thinking process is not there. It is no longer riveted to the changing of breath. And of course, with a power, as it were, over the thinking process, to be able to subdue it, to detach it by concentrating on the breathing, there comes a certain relief, because we are, on the one hand, fascinated and entertained and pleased by our thoughts. On the other hand, we are frightened by them, scared, depressed, or angered. So, concentrating on the breathing brings, to the extent that one becomes more and more apt at this, skilled at it, brings relief from all these emotions that bother us in our daily living. The process is never perfect. Thoughts do creep in, and the concentration is gone, and there's fantasy when one isn't aware that one is floating along with pleasurable or painful, frightening, or anger-arousing fantasy. But a moment of awareness happens again, and we can ask right now, as a very crucial question, how does that moment of awareness happen? What brought that about? Because one was wrapped up in thought, unawares, enjoying something or fearing something. One was wrapped up, and suddenly one becomes aware of this. How does this happen? One can, at the moment of awareness, say, oh, okay, now I got to bring my mind back to my breathing and have that intention, and the concentration starts out again on the breathing. But at the moment that one was wrapped up in fantasy, there was no intention to become aware. One was wrapped up in the thoughts, wasn't one? I personally have no answer to this question, how this attention comes into being. I don't think that there's a cause for it. We can talk more about that at another point. So the way it is usually put, the language that is used is, when I find I've been dreaming, I bring my mind back to my breathing. Who is bringing the mind back? What's back? Back is the past. It's just a matter of talking sloppily, imprecisely. I'm not berating it. I'm talking factually, imprecisely about what happens. And this is something that we can all try to do, to be precise in what we're saying. And if we want to be precise, because then if we communicate, if we talk precisely, we can communicate so much better with each other. If our language precisely expresses what we want to say. To do that, we have to pay attention to what is actually happening, which we usually don't do. We follow language patterns in saying something that we haven't really quite observed how it happens. So we say, I became aware I was dreaming, and I brought my mind back to the breathing. What is happening? What does that statement actually correspond to as far as the functioning of the mind is concerned? Does that interest one? Or is one only interested in going to the concentration, concentrating in order to attain a desired state? Never mind how it happens. I leave that to the experts. So by concentrating on the breathing, the mind indeed may slow down. Thoughts are controlled through the exercise of concentrating. A thought arises, is quickly detected and immediately suppressed with concentrating on the breathing. And so a calming of thoughts, and if thoughts are calmed, our emotions are also calmed. Because no angry thought, no angry emotion. No desirous thought, no agitation. Pleasurable agitation. No fearful thought, no physical manifestations of fear. So thought control has results for the time that it takes place. And concentrating on the breathing, making that the focus of the mind, has a calming effect, has this result. Calming the brain and the physique, the organism. But it has side effects. If the goal really is to remain concentrated, as one was a minute ago before one fell into a fantasy, this is why we say, I bring my mind back to concentrating. That state before is gone, it is a fresh concentrating, focusing. In order to do that, there has to be a lookout, a watchfulness of distractions. A sound heard like this shot has to immediately be prevented from going into association. Because if one hears a shot, usually what happens in the mind, in the brain is, what is that? Oh, that is a gunshot, it's hunting season, I wonder whether they got a deer. Too bad for the deer. I love to see them run, and now they are hunters. Will there be a hunter when I go for a walk, and so forth. The mind has an immediate network of association with one perception. Whether it's sight, sound, taste, smell. An associative network is immediately triggered, and that's when we say the mind is off. So the practice of concentrating on something. We're taking the example of the breathing here. It can be a mantra or a koan. a word or whatever, a spot on the body, the tip of the nose or the lower belly. A side effect of that is to battle, be in conflict with, or struggle with distraction. So there's one part of the brain always active in recognizing and controlling. Which is felt to be me. I am concentrating and I am controlling my thoughts. I'm cutting them off. I'm controlling my emotions and so forth. There's a feeling of a doer in this whole practice of concentration. The one who does the concentrating and who does the fighting of distractions. And at a time when I was doing this work, when we were engaged in practices like this in the Zen school of training, frequent questions in meetings were, how can I keep my mind on the breath, on the koan, on, this was about, on my belly. Can you give me some help? Can you give some instructions how I can better concentrate? Better keep the mind from wandering. So even though one has a practice which is supposed to do that for one, doesn't quite suffice. One wants to have a better practice to keep this practice going. And of course, comparisons flood in. The person next to one or across from one may look so concentrated, and one feels such a failure in comparison with that person who seems to be so accomplished at it. And one isn't aware of all of that. That is, thoughts like that, if one realizes there's thoughts going on, cut them off. Not look at what is going on. Comparison is going on. Wanting to achieve. Wanting to be good. Wanting to do right. To do better. And the tremendous fear of failure or the depression if one convinces oneself that one has indeed failed or is indeed failing. Which hooks into an old pattern of either being accomplished or being a failure. Again, associations ad infinitum with a present state, reminding one of a former state, and all the feelings and emotions and tensions accumulated in memory coming into play. And all of that being regarded as a distraction from the practice of concentrating on the breathing, which is what one feels one ought to be doing. So, can one see that a directed practice, directed toward a goal, motivated by a desire for something in the future, may bring expertise or accomplishment in that practice, as anything that we practice over and over we get maybe a little better at, or a lot better at. But in itself it sheds no light. It brings no understanding. Or does it? Please correct me if I'm wrong. And what we're wondering about here at this place with such enormous openness of nature. Remember when we first walked this land, what was just so overwhelmingly beautiful here, that there are spots on this land where you can see the sky all the way around, no matter which way you turn. 360 degrees, you can see that sky. That space where there is no barrier, no limit. And we try to build a building that gives an invitation to look out, to step out. Not to constrain and restrict and bar the vision. So, at such a place, can one begin to wonder what is happening in a human being? And as a human being, which we all are, a being like all other human beings fundamentally, we're all in great problems, conflicts, a lot of sorrow we share. If it's not our own personal sorrow, it's the sorrow of our neighbors, friends, and the people far, far away, exploding in terrorist bombs, being inspired to attack other people with weapons, suicide with weapons, and so forth. Being members of this humanity, each one of us, we are equal members of this whole humanity, which has evolved over thousands and thousands of years with archaic memory storages of our past common history, our common inheritance. I don't own my inheritance. It's come to this body and mind, which are not two. I don't even know why I mention them separately. From untold generations of forefathers, foremothers, grandmothers, parents, and their parents. A steady passing on of memory and genetics, inheritance. And here at this point of space and time, we're wondering about this whole thing. Why we think and act and emote and worry and crave and suffer the way we do. We want to find out. We want to have insight into this. Because that is quite clear existentially as well as logically, that as long as we're caught in suffering, in violence, mutual violence, there can be no peace, no true peace. One can calm the mind with a method temporarily, but that's not peace. That's a tranquilization process, which ends when the tranquilizer wears off. And then, has anything been understood in the process? Some insight gained? So one sees this leads to that, and that leads to that. And seeing that, not perpetuating it, because it's clear. See, awareness also has byproducts, if I could use that word temporarily. And such a byproduct is intelligence. Not the intelligence of lots of accumulated knowledge and trained thinking in universities or schools, but the intelligence of seeing what is so, of the harmony of thinking with the actuality, not thinking on one plane which has nothing to do with what is actually happening. And there be no meeting between our network of thoughts and what actually is so about us and all of us, our relationship and so forth. And another byproduct is love and compassion. When there's really a direct understanding, direct insight into the non-separation of man from man, or woman from man, woman from woman, and man and woman from nature. There is no separation. If that is seen and felt in one's guts, how could we hate each other or do harm to each other? We may not know what to do next, but we would not harm each other. We would understand each other. Because if one understands oneself, one understands a human being who represents all human beings. So sitting down on a mat on a windy hill, the empty trees just swishing back and forth. Here and there a shot. What is one to do sitting down, or getting up, or walking, or lying down, or eating, drinking, or working, washing the lettuce, stirring the soup, or cleaning the bowl, vacuuming the floor? Does one need to find out what one is doing? What is actually happening? And is there a method for it? Or is any method confining and walling, channeling? We asked in the opening night, what am I? Who am I? What is everything? If I don't immediately know or have the answer. Not what am I as a spiritual question, so-called spiritual question, to be coordinated with a breath and repeated moment in, moment out. Then it becomes very mechanical. And not an opening to what is actually happening, mechanically questioning and clinging to that process for fear of not knowing what to do. Can one face that fear of not knowing what to do? Or of being at loose ends? There's not a person raised, particularly in the Western civilization, who doesn't feel at loose ends, diseased or uncomfortable at not having anything to do. In other cultures, sometimes if one sees documentaries of simpler folk than we are, just sitting and doing nothing doesn't seem to be frowned upon. Of course, may not be doing nothing. The brain may be fantasizing just like we do as we are actively working. But here we're wondering what is every state of being from moment to moment? Can one plunge into it, as it were, explore it or listen to it? The words may be not appropriate to the way one goes about it. So don't be hung up on the words that I used. The words aren't important. What is important is this total openness, unsophisticated, unprepared, unknowing openness to whatever is there or emerges. If it is boredom and discomfort, what is that? If I abstain from these words which I've already pasted on this state. What is this? What we call boredom or discomfort at having nothing to do. We're talking in a couple of meetings about this, that it almost feels as though the mind is addicted to its activity. A regular addiction to being active, thinking, problem solving, planning, hoping, remembering, projecting, anticipating. And when that slows down for whatever reason, there is like a withdrawal symptom taking place. Is that why we feel so uncomfortable? When there are fewer thoughts in the mind and when we don't know what to do with ourselves, with the mind, with the body, with the practice. And like in cases where one willingly goes through a withdrawal because one will no longer be addicted, one has seen the destructiveness and danger of it. Can one here go with it? Well, let go of the label withdrawal. It was just a way to maybe highlight it for a moment. But the word is not the actual state. What is the actual state of boredom if I don't know and don't call it that? Maybe something hides underneath it if one doesn't move away into fantasy again. Just sits with discomfort and not knowing what to do. The pain of it, maybe. And doesn't call it pain, doesn't call it anything. Just the mind open, not caught up in something to hold on to. Can one hold on to the crow? Caw, caw, that's all. The breeze, the sounds of clothes rustling, the breath is there. That's the beauty of it, it's there all the time. It doesn't need a practice to listen to it. To be aware of it, all it needs is awareness, which has no mechanicalness to it, which is open and doesn't separate this from a thought of discomfort, a thought of anxiety about not knowing what to do. The breath is not separate from that. So, can one breathe right in the midst of whatever state one finds oneself? Obviously we do. Is the mind open? Has it closed? As it closes and the fantasy goes on, we're not aware of it. It happens on its own. And then one comes to again. At that moment, is there anything that the mind has to be brought back to? Or is everything there? Everything is there. Why don't we see it? Do we want something special? Can one see that? Wanting something different? And the fantasy of that different state coming up? To observe it, to be clear about it, and not caught up in it? Because it has been seen? Can one see how volatile this mind is? Wanting something different, something other than what is, and not even aware of what is, but having thoughts about it, words for it, and what is associated with the words. What is this instant if I have no words for it? If I have no comparisons with past states or future states? If there's no movement away through thought, thought is movement away. What is this instant when I don't know? What I know is not this instant. What is it? I need to listen, don't I? Open up and listen. Attend without expectation, without judgment. We will end here for today.